Is cúis onóra domsa agus tá mé Harbheith rodúil as an cura a fáilt contacht an seo. But I have to admit, despite sharing a platform tonight with the likes of Christine and Jerry and speaking at such a historic podium, I must admit that even though Rita O'Hare is someone that I've idolised my entire life, I was rather hesitant when she asked me to speak on the topic of young people in the vanguard for the Republic. Because despite the fact that I no longer consider 36 years of age to be young, nor am I in the vanguard, I'm very conscious of the fact that we in the Irish Republican family are so fortunate to have as many older inspirational figures such as Gerry Adams, who will be speaking here in a short while, and the aforementioned Rita. Both of those people and many others like them have dedicated their entire lives to our struggle, and both continue to be driving forces within the movement to achieve the Republic dreamt of by the heroes of 1916. Much of what I had planned to say tonight is almost redundant after Christine's presentation, but there's a nice fit into the start of it, so I won't be boring you for too long with the middle, and I'll just jump to the end. But the Spanish philosopher José Ortega y Gasset told us that a revolution does not last more than 15 years, the period which coincides with the flourishing of a generation. It is those generations gone before that strove to establish our republic with the youth of the country in the vanguard. We need only have looked at the slides that were presented and looked at the age of the major players, the major participants. The vast majority were in their 20s and early 30s. Each generation, and those of the earlier generation, learn and evolve our politics from their past and shared experiences, and the youth who naturally appear in the vanguard add vitality to the experiences and wisdom of the previous revolutionaries. Any analysis of the Irish struggle will show that the older generation supported and nurtured the youth, as for without them, the revolution would have been a stillbirth. That is as true today as it was in 1916 and every other momentous period in the fight for Irish freedom. This can be especially said of the men and women who rose up 100 years ago and shook an empire. Those considered to be the leaders at the time who challenged British imperialism and were executed for their efforts, they ranged in age from about 25 to 58. Nevertheless, it is accepted that the majority of those who took on the might of the empire on the streets of Dublin in that momentous week were in their late teens and early 20s. Michael Collins, for instance, he was 26 years of age and he assumed one of the commanding roles at the GPO. In the following Tan War, many of the prominent Republicans were a perfect example of youth in the vanguard of the Republic. Tom Barry was in his early 20s when he took the fight to the British in West Cork, as was Dan Breen in Tipperary. Sean Tracy was 25 and Kevin Barry 18 when they died. Of the leaders in 1916 who were more mature in years, all had developed their revolutionary instinct at a very young age and had been involved in active Republican politics since their teens. Colony, as you know too well, had dedicated his entire adult life to improving the conditions of working people in Scotland, Ireland, and of course here in the USA as well. Thomas Clark had already spent 15 years in prison for his activism, and Thomas Kent also spent a period in prison. Sean McDiarmid, it is said, claimed his Republican politics were nurtured by, I think, what you would call an elementary school teacher when he was but a child. And Michael Hanrahan claimed his idealism developed while growing up listening to all the stories of his ancestors' involvement in the Fenian Rising. And just as the men and women of 1916 drew their inspiration and motivation from the efforts of the United Irishmen and Fenians, young Republicans today remember the sacrifices made on our behalf from 1916 to the 1920s during the border campaigns, and particularly since 1969. In fact, the method of struggle that we are involved in today probably would not have been developed as soon, or indeed at all, were it not for the sacrifices and the efforts of young men and women in Armagh Prison and the H-Blocks. As I said earlier, youth shaped and drove the ideology and strategies of the older Republicans, but each new experience allowed a collective understanding to develop that encompassed the best of each generation. For nearly a century, whether it was Tom Ashe in 1917, Michael Gahan in 1976, or Mairead Farrell and Francis Hughes in the 1980s, young Republicans, even when they were incarcerated, strove to find ways to create yet another front on which they could advance the cause for Irish freedom. With no other weapons available to them, they used their own bodies in hunger strike. And reading the accounts of the survivors, this was possibly one of the most painful and selfless ways to sacrifice your life for Ireland. For 35 years, all parts of the world have recognised and celebrated the sacrifice and leadership of Bobby Sands and his 9 comrades who gave their lives slowly and painfully for a cause they believed so strongly in. It wasn't the first time in our history the young gave their life in such a way for the Republic, but hopefully it will never be the case again. Given the year that's in it and the history that we are celebrating here tonight at this event, I'm going to share a little bit of probably unknown history with you. The 1981 hunger strikes rightly caught the imagination of the world. However, not as many people would know that 4 years earlier, on the 6th of March 1977, 20 IRA prisoners in an Irish prison embarked on a 48-day hunger strike. These strikers were young men, and it is very important that their story is also recounted, because it has been forgotten by the Free State politicians who this week are accusing Sinn Féin of not being Republican. For 48 days, those men that were detained by the Irish state at Portlaoise jail refused any food or nourishment and were willing to make the ultimate sacrifice that was made a number of years later by their comrades in the H-Blocks so that their struggle would not be criminalised and the brutality and inhumane treatment of their comrades would end. Appalling physical conditions, daily strip searches and beatings, unjustified and prolonged use of solitary confinement, and psychological torture was, in the words of the prisoners themselves, systematic within Portlaoise jail. In a journal that to this day remains unpublished, the prisoners stated, as March 1977 approached, it became clearer as each day passed that nothing short of a hunger strike would be needed to highlight the intolerable conditions and force the administration to change its brutal policy. I'm going to read tonight extracts from 2 letters that were written by one of those striking prisoners. In fact, they were penned by a staff member at the Curragh Military Hospital because after so long without food, he had lost his sight. The first was written 32 days after the strike began, and the prisoner, in fairness, reading the rest of the letter, was obviously resigned to the fact that the demands were not going to be met and striking to death was inevitable. The second extract will be taken from a letter that he wrote the day after his strike ended. And the reason I'm going to share those with you tonight is what is remarkable about them and their relevance to tonight's event is that despite the passing of 6 decades in between, very little had changed about the type of person committed to Irish republicanism. The similarities with the letters penned by the Irish leaders to their families before their execution is obvious. Concern only for others, their families, and particularly their people. And their steadfast commitment to their beliefs were no different to those of the heroes in 1916 or those who led from the front in the most recent phase of our armed struggle. The 7th of April, 1977. Dear Mammy, I'm very proud of the way you and the family are standing by me. I do hope that everything is going all right at home. I would imagine all the cows are calved by now and all the crops are set as well. Did Brian pull up the boat after the fishing? Be sure and make him start the outboard motor at least every 2 weeks. Mammy, be sure and look after yourself, and don't be worrying, as I am thinking of you and the boys all the time. I will write again the end of the week, but should you not get a letter, I don't want you worrying. Look after yourself and keep your chin up. God bless. 23rd of April, 1977. Dear Mammy, just a few lines to let you know how relieved I am for you, Brian, and Danny that the hunger strike has ended without loss of life. We had our first meal this morning for 48 days. Porridge, a cup of tea, and a half a slice of toast, which was beautiful. Do not worry about me. It will take time to recover completely, but please God, by June, I should be in good shape. I cannot put into words my gratitude for the tremendous courage you and Brian showed when you visited me here last Thursday, and the way you stood by me all the way. Without your courage and support, I don't think I could have stood up to the strike. I prayed night and day for you and Brian, and thank God they have been answered. I hope to take you on a well-earned holiday and try and make up for all the hardship and agony you must have went through in the last few years. I nearly broke down the last day you came up, but seeing you in such spirits really lifted me up and kept me going to the end if necessary, as I knew you would understand. I'm very proud to say here tonight that the mammy who hid her heartache and tears from her son on the 21st of April 1977, believing it would be the last time she would see him alive, was my granny, Agnes Ferris. By sheer coincidence, my mother, who had not even met my father at the time, had travelled up with another Cumann member to drive my grandmother to the Curra Military Hospital. And both her and Anya Lynch tell the story of how my grandmother, who, if truth be told, was not a Republican and was, let's just say, a little dismayed by her two sons' Republican activities, how she refused to let her son or those guarding him see her devastation that day. She actually pulled my uncle aside before he went in, and obviously they thought they were going up and visiting their loved brother and son for the last time, and he was quite emotional, and she pulled him to the side and she told him, "You have to be brave and you have to be strong for your brother. You cannot let him see our hurt. We have to be strong for him." And my uncle was the Republican and my grandmother was not. And my mother tells the story that my grandmother walked out of the gates that day and sat into the car with her head held high. And when they were a few miles down the road and nobody could see, that was when she succumbed to her grief and her heartache, and the tears fell. But there was no way that she was going to let her son think she wasn't backing him to the end. And even though she may not have been Republican in ideology, she certainly behaved like a Republican that day. I'm equally proud to say that my father was one of the 20 hunger strikers in 1977. And the reason I'm proud is that at 24 years of age, he could have been living a carefree and comfortable life on his small family farm in County Kerry and fishing part-time out of Fenit Harbour, one of the most beautiful places in our country. But instead, like very many of you in the hall here tonight, due to your instinctive sense of justice and fairness, and even though you were not directly affected by the actions of the army that was occupying part of our country, he, like you, chose to support the Republican cause when he turned 18 years of age. And then just before his 25th birthday, he found himself embarking on a hunger strike that lasted 48 days. After his release, you will be glad to know, he did return to fishing from Fenit, but unfortunately for my mother, it wasn't always fish that he caught. And as you may also know, he ended up back in Portlaoise prison again, tried to get out a couple of times, they were unsuccessful, and he served a decade and was released in 1994. But he and other prisoners, including some of those who were on the 77 hunger strike with him, continue to this day to play a pivotal role in trying to achieve a better Ireland for all of our people. He, like Gerry Adams and Rita O'Hare and some of you that I've met here this evening, have given your entire lives to the Republican movement. And I am delighted that none of you are showing any signs of our desires of wanting to retire anytime soon. And that, to me, is what is inspirational and what is so great about Irish republicanism. Irish Republicans never feel, despite all the sacrifices they may have made and the huge contribution they have given, they never feel that they have given enough, nor will they, until their objectives are achieved. For young Republicans today, dreaming of that republic, we are in a better place than our older comrades were when they started out on their mission. And we can see farther for one reason, as we are standing on their shoulders. From our vantage point, we can see that republic solely because of their contributions and sacrifices. In my mind, it is essential for this generation of young Republicans to not just be proud of your role and the role played by members of Old Ignaherin, be it in 1916 or in 1986, but we have to strive to ensure that their commitment, that the sacrifices have been worth it. Far too many parents have buried their children, and far too many children have had to spend their childhood visiting a parent inside prison gates. Too many children have gone their entire childhood pretending to friends, pretending even to their own family, as in cousins and aunts and uncles, that they didn't actually have a daddy, when in fact they did, but he just happened to be on the run. For the wounds inflicted on generations of Irish people, we must achieve the values of Irish republicanism. And the current young people in the vanguard have to develop and deliver the republic that our people deserve. We have to deliver unity, equality, and ensure that we have control over our nation's destiny and economic resources. Young Republicans today must provide new ideas and follow the example of the likes of Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness in their younger years and think the impossible, speak the unsayable, and reinvent republicanism for the 21st century. We have come to a stage in 2016 that we will never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, We have to build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. We need to build a 32-county republic. We need to inspire people to hope that with their own hands, they can actually turn the wheels of history. And after tonight's presentation by Christine, it is no doubt that we have a very proud history. We have heroic memories to inspire us, but we have not achieved a united Ireland and the kind of republic that the best and bravest of every Irish generation fought for. We cannot be the keepers of the flame to pass it on to another generation. As Matt Carting, one of our brightest and most committed of our young leaders, as he said at last weekend's Ardèche, if not us, then who? And if not now, then when? Young leaders like Matt and Pierce Doherty, and I'm delighted to announce that we have 2 new young senators in Fintan Warfield and Niall O'Donnell as of today, and many more like them. They, I believe, will be the people who will stand shoulder to shoulder with the generation before us and will lead us to a situation where we can persuade the majority of the people of Ireland to share our dream for a better Ireland, to join us in making it a reality. They will light a fire across our small nation that will show Ireland the dawn of its new republic. It is no longer enough for Republicans to be undefeated. It's time for us to win. Gur míle maith agaibh.